The leaders of Canada, the United States, and Mexico will meet in Washington this week. It's the first North American Leaders Summit since 2016 on the agenda. COVID-19, of course, competitiveness, climate change. But of course, there are some irritants between the countries, and those will likely be discussed too. Canada's ambassador to the United States, Kirsten Hillman, is here to discuss what Canada is hoping to get out of this week's meeting. It's nice to see you on this Sunday, Ambassador. Thanks for making the time. Oh, I can't hear you, so we'll try and there we go. I think I can hear you now. Okay, what should we expect, Ambassador, at the summit? Do we have an idea of whether the administration will have other cabinet secretaries involved? Do we know, how long the meeting will be? Just anything in terms of detail on that end.
Well, thanks, Rosemary, and nice to be with you.
Thank you.
I think that some of those details are still being worked out in terms of who exactly will be there, and I'll let those be announced in due course. I think that fundamentally we're going to have a full day on Thursday, and it's going to be a day in which the leaders get together. They really talk about, as you mentioned in your opener, they haven't been together, the leaders of our three countries, in quite a long time. And so there's a lot to talk about. There's a lot to talk about what we've been through over the last year and a half and what we've learned from that and how we can go forward together in supporting each other, recovering from COVID, economic recovery, fighting climate change. And of course, for the US and Mexico in the hemisphere and us as well, migration is an important issue for discussion.
Okay, I want to go through a couple of the topics I think are likely to come up. I'll start with Line 5, an issue that you've been working very hard at from your perspective. We know that the Prime Minister does raise it with the President when they speak. Should we expect the White House to play a larger role here in trying to end this dispute, or as Alex Panetta suggested to us earlier, perhaps just to sort of put it on pause for now?
So right now, in terms of the government-to-government process with Line 5, Canada, as you know, has invoked our pipeline treaty that we have with the United States. Yeah. And the Department of State and our Department of Global Affairs are in the process of setting up the parameters for discussions under that treaty. So that's the locus of discussion between our two governments right now. Of course, it's a very important issue to Canada and Canadians, and I would anticipate, as he always does, that the Prime Minister will raise with the President, and they will talk about how it's important to find a solution here.
The fact that there is this conversation between departments, does that indicate to you that there is at least a willingness to get to some sort of agreement?
I think what I can say about that is that the administration here in the United States has been constructive and is really aware of the significance of this piece of infrastructure for Canada and for the United States as well.
Okay, auto concerns. I know that you were talking with Joe Manchin last week on Tuesday, and he then came out and seemed to be supportive of our position on this, which is, we can't really support the idea of a tax credit for U.S.-made vehicles. Is there any conversation about either, a change in the way that would look inside the bill so that it could include North American vehicles? What is the openness or the flexibility from the administration or from Democrats on this issue?
Yeah, well, so this is very much an ongoing conversation. We're coming into the conversation. We're laying out the facts about why this is not good for the U.S. It's not good for U.S. jobs. We're the #1 customer for U.S. vehicles and U.S. auto parts, and there are literally tens of thousands of U.S. jobs that require or rely on this very robust supply chain that we have with the U.S. So we're really bringing a lot of those facts to the table, and I think that is people are hearing it. People are understanding the consequence of this particular proposal, and we're still at it. I think that's what I could say. We're still really working hard to make sure that all of the relevant decision makers realize that this isn't good for U.S. jobs. It isn't good for our shared commitments to environmental protection and EV transition, and frankly, it runs in the face of the commitments that we have just made under the CUSMA, the new Nafta.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to ask you. Do you believe fundamentally that it contravenes Nafta?
you know, there are different formulations of this proposal running around, so it's always hard to make a definitive statement until you know exactly what it is that you're talking about. But a provision that requires assembly in the United States in order to sell a vehicle in the United States is inconsistent with the commitments that we have just made together under the NAFTA.
Is it difficult, Ambassador, at a time like this when you know that the White House is dealing with a lot of domestic politics inside the Democratic Party, for instance? Is it difficult to have your case heard, the Canadian perspective, when you know that there are people trying to be placated for political reasons?
I would say that Canada has never had a problem having our voice heard within the administration, in the White House, and with our allies on the Hill. We do, when there is something that matters to the Canada-US relationship, it matters to thousands and thousands of Americans, and therefore it matters to the elected officials that represent them. So we don't have a challenge there. And there are a lot of Americans that, you know, we're standing up ultimately for Canadian workers, Canadian auto sector, but the Canadian auto sector and the Canadian workers have deep ties into the United States as well. And that's obviously something that is recognized.
Mexico obviously is also concerned about the tax credit, but I wonder if Mexico is actually a hindrance to the conversation, given that the provision right now also requires that these vehicles come from unionized shops, and that labor in Mexico could actually become a problem for us in trying to salvage this requirement.
You know, I don't really want to speak to the Mexico dynamics on this. I'm here to defend the interests of Canadians and Canadian auto workers, sure, and bring that to the table. So it's hard, I don't think I can really speculate on that.
Okay. I want to ask you about the border if I can, because it was just last week the U.S. opened the border to vaccinated Canadians. But as you know, those molecular tests are still required. I'm sure you've heard from a lot of people about that requirement. What are you telling them in terms of when that might be phased out, or how long that's going to stick around, Ambassador?
Yeah, so what I often say, and you're right, I do hear about this, and I have been having conversations with U.S. representatives and lawmakers and constituents on the border, and Canadians, for a year and a half now. And the core of that discussion is around how Canada is and has always been making our decisions based on the advice of our experts, based on the needs to ensure, above all else, the safety of Canadians, and that remains true. So those tests are in place because at this time, that is the advice that we're getting. But as we all have seen over this year and a half, advice evolves just as the facts of the virus and how it's behaving in Canada and how Canadians are doing with respect to vaccination rates evolves as well. And so that's what I say. I say this has been and is and has always been a fluid situation, our border, and it will remain such. But I convey their concerns back to Ottawa, of course. That's a big part of my job.
Just last question. This is your first Three Amigos as ambassador. I wonder what that tells you about sort of normalcy, both in relation to the pandemic, but also in relation to the White House, and how encouraged you are by that.
I'm super encouraged. I'm really thrilled that our Prime Minister and other ministers, our Prime Minister is coming down, and other ministers have started to come down and meet their counterparts face to face. Obviously, the Prime Minister has met the President face to face many times, but it is always good to have people in the same room talking to each other. I think we've missed that. There's a certain dynamism and creativity and connection that comes from that. And our Prime Minister and the President have a very good and warm relationship. And I think that that's very important for Canadians. I think it's important for us in being able to get stuff done. So I couldn't be happier.
Yeah, FaceTime matters, especially after all this time. Ambassador, thank you so much for doing this morning. Enjoy your summit, and we'll talk again. I appreciate it.
Thanks very much. Have a great day.